Well, now let's turn to Martin Breckbild, MMR, who's building this ore car. And you're getting a lot of attention on this build, Martin, so thank you so very much.
This is actually getting attention.
Yeah.
Disturbing, terribly disturbing.
I watched it, and two of my closest friends.
Oh, okay, we're up to 3. Okay, that's let's see. Okay, and there we are, I hope. So this is part 3 or part 4, depending on how you're counting, but I think it's the part end by the time we get to the last slide with a little bit of luck. So let's see where we're going here. Yes, okay, so this is where we left off last week. We've got a pile of detail parts to get to and stuff to install and finish this car up. And this is where we left off. We just put the hatch doors on the bottom of the car. And now we have to put all the stuff that's missing in place. And all that missing stuff's in the baggie of metal detail parts. So here's all the white metal parts that Jim dreads having to deal with, but they're not that terrible or heinous in this particular case. What's in the baggie? Not that many parts. I keep these once opened in a little glass dish, so when I knock things on the floor, everything falls on the floor in one unit, or doesn't go off into space too badly. Usually I set these things way back on the workbench so I can pick out what I need very, very carefully, as opposed to losing things. Because I will tell you, some of these parts are prone to having pretty good aerodynamics. And once in flight, next to impossible to locate. I don't care what kind of shop you have. You'll hear it rattling around and hit things, but you won't find it on the floor until you step on it three weeks later. Sort of like a Lego. So you're gonna put the bolsters in. So you take those out of the laser cut page of wood. You file a bevel on the ends, roughly 45. I didn't measure it. You really want to get that specific to worry about that, you can, but sanding stick, you're done. Pads and the coupler pads, just glue those onto place. Coupler blocks, these blocks that go on the end. There's actually lines on the outside of the bolsters that show you exactly where they go, so it's pretty hard to put them in the wrong place. So the hinges, so they're white metal hinges. These are actually pretty clean and tidy little castings. A little bit of goo, a little bit of CA. Drop them into place. They overlap on the hatch door versus the frame. They snap right into place. The queen posts are a little tricky. There's no sprue with these. Let's back up. Yeah, so you can see there's no sprue here. You got a flat to flat connection to make, so it's a little tricky. It's nice to have the queen post with a sprue, so you have a bolt that'll go into a hole and help you hold it in place. This is one of those places where I definitely put just a little bit of goo, a little bit of CA, and wait an hour or two and come back, make sure it's really nice and tight. So you get the queen post in place. Okay, truss rods, there's brass wire supplied. There's even a template to show you how to bend the brass wire. It just goes into the frame over here, up and over. Drop a C. Actually, I put a little bit of goo on each end and CA in the middle. You're done. It's about as straightforward as it can get. The brake mounting pads, you have to cut those out of the laser cut page as well. There's little marks on here, the critical little marks I kept reminding you about last week or the week before. Make sure you know where they are. That's where those parts go. They drop right into place on the little lines. A little bit of glue, you're done. They drop in nice and clean. Okay, so the brake castings, they just get glued right into place. A little bit of goo, a little bit of CA, they drop right in. You have to drill this out and put this little clevis arm into the hole in the end, but that's not a big deal to do. Make sure you measure that with your calipers. So you get a right size drill. Chain roller mechanisms, these. You have to be careful. There are 3 that look the same. I'll go back. You can see there's 3 of these. This one's got a hole in it. Don't use that one. That's not the chain roller. That's for the brake gear. So they look very, very similar. They're not quite. This just gets glued into place here. Little CA and goo. It's done. The ladders, they pop right out of the laser cut. Clean them up with a little bit of sanding or scalpel and sanding, whichever you want. A little carpenter's glue. You're done. Just remember, okay, so now you know this points. That's the end where the brake wheel goes. Don't put the brake wheel at the other end. So there's always your pointer. It tells you where that next part goes. So, because up to this point, we had no real idea where it was going unless you really looked at those lines and thought about it a lot. But this makes it pretty foolproof. Now you know where you put your brake wheel. So, So everything's glued into place. You can see how these fit now, looking down from the top. And they drop right in. This one's a little tricky because it's spanning just these 2 little thin pieces. So a little bit of goo, a little CA, drop it in there, wiggle it into place. It fits very cleanly. You may have to take a fine file to the 2 feet, one on each end, just to make sure they're nice and clean and flat, so they'll sit on the supports nicely. Once in, they're done. They're not going anywhere. Okay, there's NBW castings. These are white metal NBWs, not the styrene ones that we're all familiar with. I have fair warning, these have incredibly good aerodynamics. It's impressive how fast they can fly into the air. You know, I did not lose any this time. The prior car that I built, which was the larger hopper, these went flying right into space, and I just replaced them with T-sheet parts. That's okay. But if you don't have T-sheet parts in your shop, be really careful with these. It turns out I have a very specific pair of pliers. I did not know these would work so well, but they actually have a very, very flat jaw, flat line profile, and they actually grip the nut castings very cleanly in O-scale. So I've learned how to use a tool that I had on my bench for about 10 years properly, finally. Okay, so I can't read my slide, but that's okay. So you're going to glue these top boards on. Got to put those on both ends, little carpenter's glue. You need a little loop to go through the 2 holes in the hatch doors. Some of that brass wire. I actually formed this working from the other side. It's a little hard to form it and test fit it from this side, but the other side has the same spacing as this side. So you flip it over, form it from the other side, pull it back out, put it back in this side, glue it in place. You need a piece of brass wire. Remember, there were holes in the sides that you had to get aligned. They're twice the thickness of the sides. Then that butts up against the outside frame. You could drill through this if you really wanted to. I didn't bother, but you just cut the brass wire just long enough to span this, and it'll snap into place. So you either drill out your brake wheel, run a piece of brass wire through it. You have this ratchet and pawl casting, the 3rd casting. This one slides right onto the wire. You drill a hole through the end of the end sill. Pick the right end sill. Make sure you're at the right end. You glue the ratchet and pawl casting to the end board. Thread the shaft through it, down through the end sill. 2 drops of CA later. It's all one unit. You're done. And that's what it looks like when you're done. I actually ran it all the way through. I drilled it up from the bottom up. And that's something you could do. You could drill this before you glued it on, but you could just drill from the bottom up. It won't matter. A hole that goes all the way through is still a hole that goes all the way through. It'll work either way. Okay. This is where you may test your metal just a shade. How nimble your fingers are. Getting a piece, that chain that's supplied has to go through that loop. Pass it through it once or twice. put a drop of CA on it. Don't let the chain hang down in the loop, down into the puddle of CA, hang it over the side, let the CA dry, then pull the chain up, wrap it around the cross wire a few times, nip off the excess, secure it with CA, you're done. There's a center cross piece. Okay, so I can't mess with it. I had to mess with it a little bit, so I added some extra NBWs that I had from Tishi. I don't remember which ones they are. 8034s, I think, whatever that means. That's the number that jumped into my brain. It's probably right. So I just drilled those in there and drilled holes and dropped those in just because I thought something's got to hold those boards in place. Okay, steps. There's two steps, one at each end, one at each corner. These are flush mounted to the underbody. It's a flat metal to wood connection again. This is again where I use a little bit of goo, throw a little CA, pull it apart, throw a little CA in, put it back together, come back in an hour. Because you really don't want to disturb this. You really want this to set up really strong. Otherwise, these are just going to snap right back off. And this is not my favorite way of having steps. Normally, I would actually suggest drilling a hole in these and then driving a regular pin through the stirrup up into the wood. That's generally what I do because otherwise they just snap off. And then I threw some extra NBWs on the ladder. Something has to hold the ladder on more than glue. So that just dresses that up a little bit. Okay. Stain, paint, etc. Okay. First step, I just stain the entire car. A big 1/2-inch brush, and I just slop Minwax stain on it. I don't know what Minwax it is because, as I said, it's the mystery Minwax bottle. When I clean out a can of Minwax, I clean it out into this bottle. I just dump it in. And this bottle is a moving target, so it's always something dark and gloomy. It's got ebony, it's got walnut in it, it's got pine in it, it's got mahogany in it, it's got cherry in it, it's got some of everything in it. And if the level goes down too far and I don't have Minwax to add, I just dilute it with some more lacquer thinner, not worry about it. But it makes a good undercoat. And it's a good way to get rid of old Minwax. And you come back in a day and take it out in the garage in the driveway and hit it with the red primer, not a rattle car. That's what I drive. You spray with a rattle can. Third step, just touch up everything, a little bit of the ironwork here and there with some steam black. That's poly scale. That's what I like to use for detail and touch up bits. Add some borrowed trucks. I borrowed some trucks from my son since I don't have trucks this scale. And I had to go visit him and borrow a HO car and steal the trucks off of it for this car. So that's what you end up with. The stain does help those boards pop out so you can actually see the individual boards now. The laser cutting, the etching in that is not obvious until a resin impregnated board. But once you stain it, it gathers a lot of the grime from the Minwax and it settles in and it begins to look like all boards. And pretty much what a can of red primer will do. And you come back and eventually I guess I don't have a picture where I touched up things. So I painted the brake wheel and the steps and probably some other odds and ends like the chain, but not much else. I left it all red. And I don't have any couplers because even the HO couplers look a little funky and weird on this. They're too small. So, for On30, it's a great little car. It's a fun little build. It's easy. Good novice, beginner, intermediate kit builder will have no problems with this whatsoever. You just follow the instructions as they're written. They're very nice and clear. I know that's a novelty to many people that have clear, concise instructions that actually are correct. There may be one or two places where the the size of drill it says to drill things out with, that's obviously from HO. So you may want to have to, every now and then you want to make sure, you might want to measure that piece of wire to make sure it's the right, match the right drill bit to it. But other than that, it's a fun little build and a nice little car. You could dress this up a lot more, put all kinds of other gusset plates and NBWs and all the intersection places where the beams go together. You could hit this with lightly with all kinds of hammers and stuff to distress it. You could put a load in it or not. It's a lot of possibilities. It's a lot of fun. So I actually had fun putting it together. And that's where we're going to stop. And if you've got questions, start screaming them.
Martin, I noticed the interior of the car is not painted red. Did
Right.
you mask that before you hit it with the rattle can?
Yeah, a little
Okay.
piece of painter's tape, a little piece of blue painter's tape, quick mask job, and yeah.
Nice job.
Thank you.
That's a beautiful, beautiful little model you made, Martin. And it sounds like it's simple enough where anybody could build it.
Yeah, this is a nice basic kit. And,
Yeah.
you know, I just wish he would make them in full O scale. I'd probably get a half a dozen of them right away, just for
Gotcha.
fun. But even if he doesn't, I could probably just take the On30 one and do a little measuring and just scratch build a half a dozen. But it's a fun little car.
So Martin, just one final question. So as being not an aficionado of glue mixing, so I guess I'm just curious, do you do that on like normally I put a dot of glue out on a paper and use a toothpick or something for application. Go through the process you do to apply those together, glue and ACC.
Okay, the glue goes on usually on the non-porous or on the porous surface. It's too small an area to do that, so actually I put it on like the steps. Use those as an example. Put a little bit of glue on the two pieces of each step, tack it into place, take it back off. I have an extra ultra fine tip on my CA. It's 1/10 of a millimeter, and you just put a little bit of CA on the two pieces of the step. Put it back in place where you took it from. Don't put it someplace new, but put it back into the goo. I don't know the chemistry behind it. I'm not an adhesives chemist, not one of my areas. And I learned long ago, metal and wood, when CA and goo get together, they have a very, very enthusiastic party together, and it gets very, very tight, very, very quickly.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's about, you get it right the first time, or you're going to be taking a scalpel or a razor saw to get it apart.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Martin, thanks so very much. You did a beautiful job once again.
Thank you, Jim.